Going on? Kevin Cole here. Unexpected points. Going to start doing a little weekly Friday thing here on the pod. Touch on basically what I do. What I can do is look through what I've commented on my Twitter feed and then try to get like some more coherent details, right? Nothing's more annoying than on Twitter where you present some argument and they'll say, but did you think of this? Oh, you're completely ignoring this. It's like, dude, it's Twitter. I'm not going to like break down every single little bit of everything going on here. Sorry. I'll try to break down a little bit more here. I probably break down even more in written format, but there's a hierarchy of laziness that comes into play, especially during the summer months, which is kicking in a bit here. And I can't like do 15,000 articles about Penix and quarterback picks and all that sort of stuff, but I can talk about it a few times as new things come up, as my mind starts percolating on some of this other stuff. But we do have some other grist here to churn through and to talk about, involving the hashtag analytics too. A few different things to talk about. I want to start though with Brad Holmes, who's quickly becoming he's marketing himself as a villain of analytics, as a rival, and we'll take it. I like it because the Lions are being successful despite not really going with what I would say as far as analytical thinking, although I did like their moves earlier. I liked them getting Goff back in that trade, even though there's some talk as to whether or not that was a throw-in, all that sort of stuff. I like some of the moves they made, and I, disliked some of the moves they've made. But they're embracing this fact that they are Brad Holmes, because they went to the NFC Championship game, almost made it to the Super Bowl. And if you look at their odds this year, they have pretty strong odds of moving on to the playoffs and getting further, especially in a weak NFC. I think they're in the top 6 to 8 teams as far as Super Bowl odds, which is pretty high. I mean, obviously well behind San Francisco, but pretty good other than that. I think they're higher than any other NFC team in their Super Bowl odds, about on the same level as the Cowboys and the Eagles. But the Cowboys and the Eagles, they have to face each other in a tougher NFC East, so it makes it harder just to make the playoffs in the first place. So anyway, they're embracing that. Holmes is going around this offseason. We have what he's doing here, which I'll go into with his positional value rant and how he's a positional villain. Or I don't know if he's a positional villain. The players are positional villains. The organization are positional villains. I'm a little confused on exactly what it means, but we'll get into that. But even prior this offseason, just to show that this is like a string of events, this is a trend here, this offseason sort of thing. Prior to this offseason, Holmes has also had a press conference where he basically demanded the media who's covering the team apologize for telling him that he should have drafted a quarterback a couple of years ago, I guess, instead of Sewell or something like that. And he says, hey, I have accountability. You guys need to have accountability for the fact that I was right and you guys are all wrong. I mean, it's not really how it works. Like the media, they can comment. They don't have to do public press conference apologies. It's kind of more the GM's job. But anyway, so we had that at first. Then we had a second thing where Holmes said that he didn't say the pick. I'm guessing it might have been Sam Laporta. My guess would be Sam Laporta. But he said that there was a player they selected who everyone in the organization. So, he's firing outside the house and inside the house when he's taking victory laps and I told you so's and dunking on people. So he's also firing inside the house where he said everyone except for him and I believe Dan Campbell. And then also Dan Campbell's a former tight end. So that makes me think it might be a tight end sort of thing. So he said everyone wanted player X. They wanted player Y, and they took player Y, and he was a huge success last year. He didn't say who, but I would guess it's Sam Laporta. It could have been Brian Branch, but I doubt that because Branch was a faller, and whereas Laporta was ranked below someone like Mayer last year, who went right after Laporta. So that's my guess. So he's dunking on people inside, and then now The third thing, which I missed, which was actually pre-draft, I missed that he's going to the trouble here. He's so affected. I mean, there's another thing. Like, why is he so affected by what the Detroit beat people are saying about things? Well, just to go back to the Mayer thing, like I thought Sam Laporta was better than Mayer. You know, he was the cover boy on my analysis last year about tight ends and everything. So I don't have anything against the pick, but I'm not sure like it reveals a great process within the organization that you're bragging about the fact that you and the coach vetoed everyone and how you're right and they were wrong. But anyway, so pre-draft he has hoodies mocked up with a lion, like an actual lion face in the middle, and then it says positional on the top and villain on the bottom. Because I guess he's still so upset about the criticism that he received. And when he talks about it, he says, you guys. So I think he's really focused on the beat reporters. Like, he really doesn't like it when these guys are questioning him. It's kind of their job. I understand they're inflammatory sometimes. They're going to go with, the ups and downs. They're too up and down always, the beat reporters and other people. And it can be kind of ridiculous. But, got to let it roll off of your back a little bit. When times are good, I wouldn't go and yell at everyone for, see, I told you so, because, times are going to be bad or disappointing. Like, expectations are pretty high in Detroit. So when times are disappointing, you don't want to necessarily build up, enemies or people that are going to want to give them reason to come at you even harder, even though, they probably will either way. So it doesn't really matter. So let's go to, I want to play through here the positional villain. Where do I got it here? Oh, here it is. Okay, so the positional villain. And I put myself in the corner here. So let's go to Mr. Holmes. This is him walking away from the mic here. The story behind the swag. These social media accounts are out of control, trying to use hip lingo. But anyway, so this is the story behind the swag when it comes to the reason that Holmes here is wearing the positional villain hoodie. This is something, again, the Detroit Lions account here on Twitter is putting out. Let's let it play here.
When I got tipped off on what positional value was, I didn't know what that was. I didn't.
Okay, let's stop it here. Sorry, it's a 36-second clip, and I'm stopping it 6 seconds in. He says, when I first got tipped off to positional value, I guess he's talking about a year ago when people started talking about it. I don't know. He's like, I didn't know what that was. Okay, that has to be a bit, right? This has got to be a bit. I mean, this guy was in the Rams front office. He came over. He's a GM. Like, he knows what positional value is. Come on. Maybe he just doesn't, like, maybe to the degree that he's getting it at. But okay, so I'm saying this is a bit / like he's playing a character here, I think. Oh, whoops. Sorry about that. So he's playing a character here. So let's get to the rest of this.
So it was just like a new analytic. I didn't know what it was.
New analytic.
When you guys showed it, I was like, oh wow, that's. And then I thought about it, and I was like, positional value. I was like, so you pick a position, but not the player.
Okay, so let's look at this one here. So you pick a position, but not the player. Like, what does that mean? Again, I think this is like he's doing a bit, right? He has to be doing a bit. We all know. Like, you don't just pick position. And I made the joke that eventually with the world that the analytics wants is they'll just send in a card with a position on it without a player, and that'll be it. I mean, you can back into what you think that he's saying and say, oh, he's saying that you don't care who the position is, or you just let the big board, because it's this big board. No, sorry. You don't care who the player is. You just let the consensus big board do it and blah, blah, blah. And you guys don't care about the player. I mean, the reality is the player matters more than anything else. Like, we get that. Position matters. But we're bad at guessing that, right? We're really bad at guessing that. You should go to an account. There's an account called, I think it's Coach Speak Index. You guys should go check out this account because it has a bunch of clips of all the different GMs and coaches talking post-draft. I mean, if you go through this account, you go through all these guys talking about all their draft picks, you might as well just mark them all down for the Hall of Fame, because every single one, and fans eat this up because I get it. We're in hopium season. This is hopium season. Have some fun. because every single one is like, oh, this player is this. We like this player because of this. We like this player of this. We like this player of this. Yeah. They're all picking the player. They're picking the player because of all these reasons. The reality is, roughly, depending upon the round, but in these early rounds, roughly half of those evaluations are going to be like, oh, you were right, and half of them are going to be wrong. But they all think they're right now. So yeah, you do pick the player. And that's going to be the most important thing. Being right on that player is going to be the most important thing. But we just have a very small window into being right there versus other decision makers who are extremely good at what they're doing. So yeah, you pick the player and the position. And then even if you were a super analytics type, and this is another retort or objection or straw man that'll be put up there, is they'll say, oh, well, what's the difference between what you're going to do and just neutering your scouts, basically, and saying we're just going to take whoever's highest on the consensus big board. Now, I definitely would have an eye towards the consensus big board, but you have to look at it in the context of these are a lot of not as well trained people that are doing broad analysis, so they can't dig in nearly on the level that your own scouts can on specific position groups. Many of these guys, didn't play or coach these exact position groups. They don't have that information. And then on top of that, you have medicals, you have visits in person, you have additional testing that you're doing. Maybe not S2 testing, although I think S2, the pushback against S2 is probably overhyped a bit. It's probably still pretty valuable, and I think they've been using it in other sports for a while, these cognitive testing. You have that stuff. You have character. You have interviews, which might be overplayed. So you got all this stuff. You have fit on a particular team. You have all this stuff that you're scouting to find the right player, even within a position, right? And even further, it's not just one position. We're talking about positional value. We're saying first round, early first round, or mid first round, look for a tackle, an edge, or an interior pass rusher. That's a lot of players you can choose from. That's a lot of players. It's not just one player. It's not just one position you turn in. It's multiple positions and multiple players. And then if you really can't find that and can't trade down to maybe the later first round or that sort of area. And again, this is just theoretically. There could be other issues. You could take wide receivers or cornerbacks earlier, but wide receiver and cornerback. Now we're looking there. Lots of players. Tons of players. Lots of players to choose from. Lots of players you're picking. Are you telling me these scouts they can't pick? They have to just be able to have the total hundreds and thousands of players to choose from. They can't narrow that down even slightly to figure out which player you might want amongst these multiple positions. So you just don't have to go all the way to running back. So you can pick the player there, but you're probably wrong about the value there, or at least you're tilting the odds severely against yourself by going player there. So that's what it is. But again, he's doing a bit. This is like rhetorically pleasing. People like to beat their chest and football guys versus the nerds. Yeah, it feels good. Again, these are feelings. These are tradition. This is not like actually diving in to think about what could possibly be right or not and how we can look at things in a different way. Okay, well, we continue. I don't know if he has anything else interesting to say, but we continue here for Mr. Holmes.
I was thinking, I was like, no, we're looking for football players.
No, we're looking for football players because, if you're going positional value and you're choosing to draft a more valuable position, you're not going to get a football player. Like, what does that even mean? It's so silly. But anyway, I get it. These guys, again, they're doing a bit.
So we're looking for these guys. And so, but it doesn't matter. So it's more positional villain.
So they're looking for positional villains. So I guess, wait, if you're saying they're looking for these guys, I guess the players are the positional villains. Okay, so the players are positional villains. Okay. Again, it's a little confusing here, but let's try to take a step back here. Again, Holmes is dunking on everyone because they were critical. The beat reporters and people like myself were critical of his draft last year. This year, he did pretty well positionally. Next year, I guess if the Lions do well, they'll be dunking on us for saying that they traded up. Of course, that would really make no sense because you should be better this year if you did trade up. You're literally giving away draft capital in future years to be better this year. So it's more of a long-term thing. But anyway, that won't stop people from doing that sort of. He'll have a trade back villain. with a picture of the players that he traded up for on there next year. But let's think about this. So last year, right? I think a lot of people are saying to themselves, hey, the Lions had this draft that got panned on the basis of positional value, and the Lions were good. So therefore, bad analysis of the draft. But why were the Lions good? Like maybe we should think about that a little bit, right? Like why were they actually good? And so I got some numbers here. Everyone's favorite thing. I got some numbers here, and I am going to lay this in. Actually, I forgot to do this beforehand, so apologies in advance. But so I'm going to share a different tab here. And I have my plus minus numbers. Okay, so this again for those who haven't seen this, this is numbers where I use PFF grading, I use stats, I use a whole bunch of stuff. I look at on and off the field with participation numbers for positions historically. I cluster and group and do modeling and regressions and all kinds of nerd shit on these guys by grouping together clusters of players, because it's really, really hard to look at an individual player and their on-off splits the way you would do in the NBA, where you have we have a big sample, players come on and off regularly, that sort of thing. You don't have that. Like an offensive tackle doesn't even leave the field unless they're injured. There's no rotation at all going on there. But if you can group together a bunch of offensive tackles who are similar over a number of years based upon their grading and their stats and everything else, then you get an idea of what that group and their on-off performance on a play-by-play basis, and then you look at how many plays that this player played, you look at how efficient they should have been on a per-play basis, and blah, you get a number. So for the Lions, I don't have a quarterback number because it's hard to do, but Jared Goff has been awesome for them. Okay, whatever you want to say about he's a limited quarterback, that's fine. He still is a quarterback who, if you put him in a position where he can set and throw, he's really damn good at throwing the ball, getting it to where it goes. He's really good at that. Really, really good. There's a reason he was the number 1 pick overall in the draft. It wasn't a fluke. It wasn't, just because he fooled some people. No, he knows how to get the ball to people. Now, the Lions have put him in a really good position. So if they put another quarterback in that position, maybe he would have also done well, but probably not as well as Goff. I mean, Stafford might have done as well as Goff, let's say, but not just anyone off the streets. I mean, Goff is someone who's now the last couple of years is putting up easy top 10 EPA per play type of numbers. So he's probably like the most valuable player on the team. And I know people would want to say even over average that you would think of there. Again, former number 1 pick. He's going to get probably a pretty decent contract here. So he's someone who was kind of a throwaway on a trade. And I know some people dispute whether or not he was really a throwaway. I've heard from people, this is like secondhand sort of information here, but I've heard from people who have talked to people in the Lions organization that was how they did view him. They viewed him as, we're taking on this contract to get some extra draft capital. They were going to start him, try to rehabilitate him, and then, maybe trade him off or draft another quarterback. But he did so well and he's been so good that they might end up extending him. So, again, positional value, quarterback. They have a quarterback who's playing well. That's the number 1 thing that's helping them offensively, probably. Thumbs up, positional value, quarterback. He's not a villain. Sorry. Jared Goff, not a positional villain. Okay, and then my numbers for the rest of these guys. Again, I'm not juking the stats here. I don't even know. I'm not sure I know what that means, but I know they say it in The Wire when they talk about crap stats. So I'm not juking the stats to make the positions that I like look better. This is just how the numbers work out. So, sorry, not sorry on this. Number 1 for the Lions last year, Penix, offensive tackle, 32 points added to point differential. That's roughly like a win. Now, you wouldn't project them for a win necessarily going forward, but looking back last year, a win, maybe a little bit more than a win, depending upon how you look at it. Offensive tackle, not a positional villain. Amon-Ra St. Brown, second, 32 points. 31.7 points. So very close. Wide receiver, again, not a positional villain. Maybe you could say slot wide receiver is a little positional villainy. There's some villainy in there. And that's a good pick by Holmes. But again, in 4th round, he was someone who actually fell quite a lot. So I don't know if it's like Holmes had some great insight into Amon-Ra St. Brown, other than the fact that he fell and it was like, okay, let's take this guy in the 4th round. And Penny Sewell, too. Do you have great insight into Penny Sewell? I don't know. I mean, he didn't go quarterback. He didn't go Justin Fields there, as I guess some of the Detroit beat guys wanted him to do there. But he's another guy who was like a very, 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 very highly touted prospect who happened to fall to them in that spot. And there were a lot of hits in that draft. So, tip of the cap, you made the pick, you hit it, but you certainly didn't. You're certainly not a positional villain. Number 3, Brian Branch. Now, this is an interesting one, right? Because Branch is a draft pick from last season who was probably a positional villain. And this goes into the fact that like all models are wrong, but some are useful. So in my model last year, I think he was a safety. I think he was a safety because of how he was labeled coming out of the draft. And if you look at Branch last season, I'm going to bring up his PFF numbers. So snaps by position, slot corner, 624 out of his 873 snaps were as a slot corner. He was in the box, so I guess you consider that like a box safety, but because I don't know, they don't really differentiate between a box safety and an off-ball linebacker would also be quote-unquote box. So not lined up directly across, though, from a receiver. So maybe that would be like he would have been in a slot corner in that sort of role, but then they don't have a slot receiver. So then he kind of plays in the box. Maybe he's kind of like guarding in a lot of ways. I mean, in man, he would probably be guarding, the tight end or someone or whoever's in that sort of position. 127 snaps, only 34 snaps as a free safety. And 42 times he was up on the defensive line rushing in. So, but mostly he's like a slot corner. And those numbers go into like whether you're slot or not goes into my analysis. So I give credit to slot corners as being pretty valuable. So he comes up 3rd. But even still, even if you're going to say he was a little bit of a positional villain last year, Branch, because he was a safety, and that's why my analysis would have dinged him unfairly. I agree. Again, models are wrong. This model was wrong because it's naive. It's just plugging in safety. It's not looking at the specifics of the position. And those are all things you got to do to improve upon these models. Even still, with the great season that he had, I estimate him as adding about 16 points. So about half a win. So about half of what these other guys are adding. So a slot corner, still a great season from a slot corner. Valuable, but maybe about half the value as these other guys. Positional villain Frank Ragnow is next on there. So I'll give, but again, that's not part of the picks that we're talking about here. And as we go further and further down, Sam Laporta, only 6.3 points. I was actually a little bit surprised that he's so low as being the 8th most important player, a little bit lower than David Montgomery. So that tells you something there. He missed some time. There might be a bit of a tight end issue in the model. Again, I'll say for the 5,000th time, all models are wrong or some are useful. There might be a little bit wrong here that you just don't have enough tight ends to cluster with in order to get accurate numbers. So his value is probably a bit higher than that. And he would have been a positional villain. But actually, if you look at like the write-up that I had on them, and I'll bring that up. Actually, let me bring that up now. So this is what I said about the Lions last year. I said the Lions were the yes, yes, no of the draft. Again, this is my analysis here. When an apparently shrewd move to trade down from 6 to 12 was revealed as a positional value killing plan to get running back Jahmyr Gibbs at a better price. Yeah, is that harsh? I don't know. I think it's fair. The Lions also, I do use some inflammatory language. I'll give the Lions also whiffed on positional value. Well, like I said, they did whiff on positional value. Again, I'm not making a player critique here. So the Lions whiffed on positional value and reach value. So both of these different things, as I look at on off-ball linebacker Jack Campbell, the 42nd ranked prospect on the consensus big board with the 18th pick. The Lions had the worst results for positional value loss, and this is overall, and that includes a big gain for selecting quarterback Hendon Hooker in the early 3rd round. It's not a pick that will likely pay off, but if it does, the surplus value will be outstanding. So this is what I wrote at the time about them. I think everything is fair. Notice I didn't mention Brian Branch. Notice I didn't mention Sam Laporta, although those, according to the model, would have been bad. But in my head, I was hedging a little bit on those. And those are the guys who ended up being pretty valuable for them last year, but not their first round picks. Jahmyr Gibbs. Let's go down to Jahmyr Gibbs, 10th most valuable player. So not, there's some value there, 5.9 points added, according to this analysis. I know he had like optically pretty big numbers with almost 1,000 yards. I know he made the Pro Bowl, which is kind of meaningless. But counting numbers and absolute stats and Pro Bowls and things like that for running back, a little bit more difficult to really get a grip on what the value is. He wasn't his value. And again, no value passing. He was actually had value running, according to my numbers. No value as a receiver, over average-ish sort of number. Same with Montgomery. So he didn't really bring that receiving value that you were hoping for. He just wasn't in the game on a lot of third downs, so you would have expected. So 10th. So, okay. So your first round pick was like, okay, but not really great. And again, you hit a Pro Bowl. You hit a Pro Bowl player. And he's the 10th most valuable player on your team, not counting quarterback. If you hit a Pro Bowl at tackle, if you hit a Pro Bowl at wide receiver, if you hit a Pro Bowl player at tight end, even. If you hit a Pro Bowl player at edge rusher, if you hit a Pro Bowl player at interior defensive line, you're going to be getting some more value. From that, probably. All right, so now if we go to, though, and this is what's probably more important, is the second pick here. That was a reach, number one, and bad positional values, an off-ball linebacker. I have negative 13 points for plus-minus for Jack Campbell last year, the fourth worst of any player on the team. Now, some of this is he played a lot, so he had to play a lot. And he was okay against the run, but the pass was bad. Now, if you have a critique for this, it would be the PFF. You're going to say PFF grading, they don't know what they're doing, because I don't really have a lot to go on when it comes to receiving, and I'll bring up his PFF page here for Campbell. I don't have a lot to go on when it comes to how good of coverage they are, but for Jack Campbell last year, I'll try to highlight this at the bottom of the screen if you can see it. For Jack Campbell last year, his coverage grade was a 35.3. Yikes. So maybe it's just bad luck. Maybe he'll come around. His run defense grade was pretty good, but his coverage grade was awful. So like an off-ball linebacker who's not good at coverage in the first round, that's like an extra positional value sort of killer. If you look at the stats on coverage, 83% completion percentage against, 12 yards per reception, a couple of touchdowns, one pass breakup, not great there. But if you look overall, maybe I should do this. If we go by position, this will get an idea. And again, we're basing this on the on PFF here. So minimum coverage snaps, let's say 50%. You have to have done 50% here. Off-ball linebackers. How do we look here? So we have CJ Mosley at number one at a 90. And remember, he was 35. So we're going to scroll. I guess he doesn't show up as even getting the 50. Oops. Okay, hold on. I can't do 50% so let's do a different custom number. Let's just do 300 coverage snaps. Does he have 300 coverage snaps? Let's see. Jack Campbell, he is second to last of 60 players who had 300 coverage snaps this year. Actually, it's kind of interesting that David Long is at the end, because I thought he was like a decent free agent signing, and he's actually worst for the Dolphins. He came up with the worst number at 29. So I don't know. Maybe we shouldn't be victory lapping a little bit here for positional value. If the main critique was in the first round, where you have a ton of ability to go get some good positional value guys, you got a running back who was okay, who's a Pro Bowler, but was just like okay by actual value. And then you got an off-ball linebacker who, wasn't good. Rookie year, maybe they'll get better. The coverage grades bounce all over the place, but at least according to the numbers, wasn't good. So, congratulations on making it to the NFC Championship game. It doesn't have a lot to do with the positional value sort of arguments from last year and what ended up happening. Sorry, just the case. Brian Branch, though, you're right. I'll give you that one. That was probably down-weighted too much in my model because of his safety, and he was been a pretty effective slot corner. And my numbers say he was pretty good. He was pretty good last year. So, hey. But, we'll see what happens with the Lions this year. No reason they shouldn't be doing well, but as, those two main guys that we're talking about, they got a ton of positional value off of other than Jared Goff and also Jared Goff. So, but Penny Sewell and Amon-Ra St. Brown just signed them to big new contracts, top contracts at their respective positions. Not going to affect you this year that much because of how contracts are structured. Not going to affect you next year that much, but things are going to get a little bit tougher. You had them as extremely valuable players on a cheap rookie contract, especially Amon-Ra St. Brown, who is a fourth rounder, is like making peanuts. You have Jared Goff on a very cheap kind of quarterback contract, right? If we go to quarterback contracts this year, let's go ahead and bring this up. So quarterback contracts for anyone this year. Can't make this bigger. What's going on here? There we go. Where is our friend Goff? Actually, let's look at his cap hit for last year. So if we go to Jared Goff cap number, where is he? I'm scrolling. Where the heck is this guy? Oh, yeah, he's actually pretty high. He was 30 million. Okay, so I won't give you that hard of a time, actually. My bad. So 30 million for Goff last year. Not the worst number in a year, but things are exploding this year. And where's Goff going to be this year? It's going to be at 32. So you're getting pretty good value for that versus 63 million for Deshaun Watson, 55 million for Dak Prescott, 53 million for Russell Wilson. Of course, that doesn't count. That's all been written off into the billionaire Walmart. It's a Walmart write-off. Matt Stafford, 50 roughly. Kyler getting up there near 50. Daniel Jones, 47. So, you're still getting a pretty good discount on Goff. And if you redo his contract again, you'll get some benefit for the next year or two. So we're really talking about things that are going to happen in a few years. And that's also part of the problem with these discussions. When we have victory lapping, within 12 months of takes, where when it comes to analytics, at least most of the time, this is not like a fourth down decision. This is, if you trade up, it's going to affect you next year more than this year, 2 years from now more than a year from now, probably even 3 years from now more than 2 years from now. That's like a lifetime, right? When we talk about positional value, it's going to affect you somewhat in year one, but more in year 2 and year 3 as the rookies kind of grow into who they're going to be in players. So when we're doing this victory lapping that quickly, it doesn't necessarily work out all the time. All right, before I get on to the next thing, let's see what comments we have here. Goff folds under pressure. Okay, let's take this one here. I would assume that a safety can play in the slot is more valuable than a traditional safety. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, Hamilton, I looked at Hamilton too. Hamilton's not playing in the slot nearly as much as Branch, so that hurts his numbers a bit. But you're right. That might be an area where, again, our models don't catch up with the reality of the NFL sometimes when we're using historical information. And like these safeties could be more versatile than we believe. Okay, so Brad Holmes, we'll see. We'll see. I don't know. Am I rooting for you? I was gonna say I'm rooting for you, but I don't know if I can. I got to root for my takes. So I'm probably not actually rooting for you. Sorry about that. Okay, another discussion. This is kind of a similar positional value sort of discussion. I think there's some nuance in here, which is tough to talk about on Twitter, but it's something that came up to me via Twitter. And so this came up from the fact of, let me share my Twitter feed so I can find what I'm talking about here. So this came up from the fact that there was someone clipped my analysis on the Giants, and then a lot of Giants people jumped on it and wanted to get on me. So this is what I said about the Giants from this draft. I said the Giants continue to be one of the more uninspiring front offices in the NFL. They made no trades, so that's kind of uninspiring. At least adhering to the do no harm philosophy. They really get crushed for positional value, taking Malik Neighbors in the top 5. Now, some people got me on this one. Yeah, it was top 6. Apologies. Where historical averages favor quarterbacks, offensive tackles, and pass rushers. Drafting a safety in the 2nd round. Again, this could be, maybe there'll be a great slot corner. We'll see. The lowest value position I say the early round, I meant in the early rounds, is a surefire way to burn draft capital. So some people didn't like that. Let's talk about the neighbors part, because I think the neighbors part is interesting. Because again, models are useful, not correct. And one of the replies to this, or quote tweets from this, one of the better ones. Let me see if I can find it. Here we go. From Dan Schneider here. He says, I like Kevin's work a lot, but drafting based on historical position averages is a much surer way to get it wrong. I don't know if that makes sense. Actually, I don't sure. Is that a sure way to get it wrong? I don't really know. It sounds interesting. I guess we're in a whole new paradigm sort of take, which, may be true, but I don't think it's like most of the time drafting upon historical position averages is probably the right way to do things. But anyway, I digress. It says Malik Neighbors was so clearly the best player valuable, and wide receivers second contract market means the Giants get a cap advantage. So safety more to Shane Bowen's system than a loss of value. Okay, well, forget trying to say like this player matches our system, that's why they're worth more than you might think. I mean, let's take that part first, even though this wasn't really what I was going to talk about. That's kind of always the case, right? Like it's always the case that the team, again, you watch the coach speak index, all the teams are talking about, man, this player fits our system. Woo! You should see how well this player fits our system. There has never been a better system fit in the history of system fittedness than this player in our system. So like that's almost something that's implied in every single draft pick, and we shouldn't really get extra credit for that. Now, after the fact, we'll look back and we'll say, oh yeah, that guy didn't fit in his system at all. That was stupid. But again, I think sometimes you're like making excuses for just bad players. So sorry, not sorry. I discount that one. So the Malik Neighbors being so clearly best player available and second wide receiver contract. Okay, let's investigate those things, because I think those are things where sometimes, and this is like a big difference between what we're trying to do analytically and what we're pushing up against when we get objections to what we're doing, is sometimes you say something as a point and then it's almost supposed to be accepted as a correct thing. Now that actually this summer I'm doing a little, you think I'm obnoxious now? This summer I'm doing something where I'm going over some of the classics here, some of the philosophical classic stuff. I kind of want to add that to my repertoire as also beyond kind of the pure quantitative data science analysis. So I'm doing some of the classics, and of course I'm rereading, although I didn't, to be honest, I probably just cliff noted the first time. Plato's Republic. Pretty good translations, a lot of notes in there, isn't that? But one of the things that comes up in here is, it's a dialogue where Socrates, who was his teacher, is like, he's writing, Plato's writing it, but it's about Socrates is the first person character in these dialogues. But anyway, so we use the Socratic method, which is anytime a person just says something, and then you ask, well, let's talk about the assumptions behind what you're saying to make sure you're not just saying something to say something, but we've gone back to kind of more like first principles as to why it's the case. Now, again, I know Dan is on Twitter here, so he can't go back to first principles when he's discussing something. But I'm just going to say, like, this is what I would do if I was having a back and forth with Dan about this. So saying Malik Neighbors was clearly the best player available. Let's look at that. Okay, that's a fact. But what's implied when you're saying that fact is if someone is so clearly the best player available, they're the right draft pick, right? That's what's implied by this. Implied by the statement is like, we don't have to, like, let's not get in. Why they're the right draft pick is there's a lot of factors in that, but that's all encompassed in this best player available. So if we just say they're the best player available, clearly best player available, then they're the best draft pick. I mean, I don't know. I mean, just to disprove that theory, and I don't think Malik Neighbors is similar to Saquon Barkley, and maybe, mentioning this, and this is what I replied to Dan with, to Giants fans is a low blow. But mentioning it to Giants fans, well, Saquon Barkley was the number one big board prospect. So, like, he would be the clear best player available at the 5th pick overall, at the 6th pick overall, at the 10th pick, at the 15th pick, right? But I think a lot of people, including Giants fans, most Giants fans now, maybe not Dave Gettleman, maybe he's still like typing away on his imaginary keyboard, but a lot of Giants fans would say, oh, well, yeah. Well, yeah, he was the best player available, but he's a running back. So, like, that doesn't count. Okay, well, that's positional. You just said that the position matters as we're thinking about these things. So does the wide receiver position not matter? Should we not think more deeply about my point? Again, if I'm saying the wide receiver position isn't as valuable as these other positions, and you're saying, but they're the best player available, but then you'll also admit the best player available is position dependent, well, then that goes back to my first point, right? So we just have a difference of opinion as to whether or not the main point is whether a wide receiver should be considered on the same level as these others, right? Forget BPA, forget best player available. Doesn't matter to me, other than like you're not reaching multiple rounds. But again, that wasn't my point that you're reaching multiple rounds for Malik Neighbors. So best player available doesn't matter. It's kind of it's something that's thrown in here as a point in the favor, but it really has no significance, in my opinion. The second thing, wide receiver second contract market means the Giants get a cap advantage. Okay, let's dig into this one because this is really interesting. I think this is the interesting point here. How do we think about this with wide receiver contracts exploding in recent years? How do we think about that and positional value? Because traditionally, offensive tackle, edge rusher, defensive interior pass rusher, like an Aaron Donald type, have much, much bigger contracts than wide receivers, but wide receivers contracts have gone up probably more than anyone recently. So if we're using historical data, are we wrong about this? Partially. I think we could be partially incorrect, or we haven't caught up. It's this whole problem of non-stationarity, we have a low we have double problem in the NFL. We have a small sample size, and even within that small sample, we're taking it from different areas where the game is changing. So we do have to think about these things. So I agree with Dan. We got to think about this wide receiver second contract market and how things are changing. Okay. But so let's look at it. Let's look at first, though, I'm going to talk about like the positions I think should be more highly valued. And let me just get the full contract for these. So let's just look at tackle, just for the sake of tackle, because this is the decision that the Chargers made in the previous pick. Now, obviously, there's contextual stuff here with, Joe Alt's not there. You'd have to go with someone else. But, there was a tackle who went in with the next pick. And I know that people aren't seeing J.C. Latham and nearly on the same level as Joe Alt. Okay, great, whatever. These are minor details that I don't think are disqualifying in any sort of way. So we look at left tackle contracts here. Yeah, the outright number of average per year is not as high necessarily as wide receiver. So that's one thing. But I'm going to get more into that when we look at the wide receiver contracts and how those numbers are they're kind of more fake, honestly, those per year numbers than they are for tackles. Because tackles play a long time. They get signed to third contracts more often than almost any other position with the existing team. And they can play into their 30s. So if we look at play well into their 30s more so than other positions. If we look at the top players, though, we have to think about opportunity cost here. So the Chargers taking a tackle and then going wide receiver, they're saying, well, we want to prioritize that tackle early and the wide receiver later because there's more availability later. So even if theoretically Neighbors was a more valuable player than, let's say, J.C. Latham, if the difference between the tackle and I know you don't need a tackle if you're the Giants. Okay, I don't want to get too much into the specifics of the Giants here, but even if you could get a wide receiver in the second round where the differential between that player and the tackle is better, is less, so the total combination of those two positions is better to say first round tackle, second round wide receiver than first round wide receiver, second round tackle. That has to be considered as part of this. So just looking at the top tackles that we have on this list, Laramie Tunsil, right? Laramie Tunsil, 13th pick overall. He would have been higher if it wasn't for the whole bong rip incident, that tape that came out early. He would have been a top 10 pick, right? Andrew Thomas, 4th pick overall, is next on the list here. Trent Williams, I mean, he old, but still, 4th pick overall is next on the list. Jordan Mailata, now this is an interesting one. Round 7. Didn't see that one. A little bit of an overpay by the Eagles, quite honestly, but it's a new contract. So put him on there. So, hey, maybe you can find him in the 7th round. Dion Dawkins, 2nd round, 63rd. Okay, so we're getting some 2nd round here for Dion Dawkins. Jake Matthews, 6th pick overall. Look at all these top 10 picks. A lot of top 10 picks here. Colton Miller, 15th overall. First half of the 1st round. Not top 10, but pretty high up, right? Cam Robinson, 2nd round, 34th overall. Fringe 1st round pick. So we basically have had an outlier 7th rounder, one that's almost in the 1st round in the 2nd round, one that's mid 2nd round. The rest of them, all the first half of the 1st round, the majority of them, the top 10 of these different guys. And this is not counting guys who haven't been extended. Are any guys? Oh, look at Ronnie Stanley. That's another guy. So this is a guy who has I don't know why this number looks so low. I guess there must be some shenanigans going on here. But he's one of the top tackles, right, in the league. 6th overall for him. Who are some other guys? Taylor Decker. That's another guy. So Taylor Decker. What was he? 16th overall. So barely in the first half of the 1st round, but in the first half of the 1st round. A lot of guys. Like, do you sense a trend here for what's going on here for these left tackles and where you're finding these guys? These guys, look at these guys. 30 years old, 30 years old, 32 years old, 32 years old. How many of these guys are playing for their first team? Well, not Laramie Tunsil, but he was traded for a boatload of picks. Trent Williams was traded for a decent return, and once he was already into his 30s, right? Dion Dawkins is playing for the team that drafted him. Jake Matthews, Garrett Bowles, who's 30-something. Teron Armstead, no, which is interesting. But he actually wasn't a very, very high pick. Taylor Decker, like a lot of these guys, right? Ronnie Stanley, like they're all still playing for he's not that old though. They're all still playing for the teams that drafted them for the most part. So you're getting like a long term. These are not fake contracts. They're extending them over and over again. They're not contracts which are meant to explode eventually. And if we go over to right tackle, again, if you need a right tackle, Penny Sewell, top 10 pick. Juwan Taylor, that's a free agent contract, so I wouldn't be so hot on that. 35th overall, almost 1st round pick, though, even for him. It's kind of a bad contract. Lane Johnson, right? 4th overall. These are some high picks. Okay, Ramczyk, he's 32nd. So, like, that's low compared to this cohort that we're looking at, right? Just being at the end of the 1st round is kind of low. Other guys that have not been extended on here, but we should probably highlight as being top tackles. I mean, Tristan Wirfs, right? He's going to be a top guy, 13th overall. So, yeah, not top 10, but looking pretty good. Anyway, this is like insane, isn't it? How much these tackles are early picks. The guys that are being these most valuable guys that you're signing to multiple contracts, multiple extensions for these teams. None of these guys are really hitting the market. They're only available because the Dolphins were doing a total complete teardown and decided to trade away Laramie Tunsil, or Trent Williams was kind of old. And again, they were a down team that was trading to a competing team. And he was out of his prime, really, at that point. None of these other guys are really in their prime, And all of these early 1st round picks. Now let's turn to wide receivers. So 2 different points about wide receivers. One, we talk about the fakeness of some of these contracts. Okay, so A.J. Brown, number 1. So A.J. Brown's 2nd round pick. We already have 51st overall. This is already a pick that's taken later than almost every single one of the top tackles that we're talking about. Is a guy who went later than almost all of them, right? And this contract, like, what the hell is going on here? $53 million cap hit in a void year in 2030. Like, I haven't even dug into what this extension, this madness was going on here for the extension. But if you look at guaranteed salary, at least, I mean, it's 0 in 2026, but there's probably actually no. Okay. So in 2025, the guaranteed salary and workout and guarantees become guaranteed. So, and then $4 million of the 2027 salary becomes guaranteed in 2026. So you can take the dead money at that point in 2026, even though it would be significant. Actually, 2027. You can take the dead money in 2027. So it's really like a 3-year deal. And then a lot of funny money stuff going on. So if you look at the contract and you say, oh, A.J. Brown is making more than all these different tackles, I don't know. There's a lot of nonsense going on there. Amon-Ra St. Brown, right? 4th round pick. And let's look at this contract. How much funny business do we have going on here? We got $16 million void year down the line. So we'll see about that. We have fully guaranteed money of $35 million. And I don't know. It looks like the money is guaranteed. It looks like there's only $9.9 million of dead money in 2026. And he's a $33 million cap hit. I don't know. Like, there's a pretty good chance that Amon-Ra St. Brown plays out 2 years on this deal. And then if he's not playing well, he might not be extended at 27 years old. So again, a lot of funniness, a lot of funny stuff's going on with these contracts. We shouldn't take these contract values at face value at wide receiver. Tyreek Hill is next. Now, of course, he was a 5th round pick. Yes, 5th round pick. But you know, obviously there were some concerns with him when it came to I don't know, punching his girl, his now wife at the time, that dropped him down. But even still, I don't think he would have been a top 10 pick or anything like that. There's some funny business going on with this contract too. I mean, he has a $56 million cap hit in 2026. Good luck. You know, again, funny business. A lot of funny business going on with these contracts. These are really at most $25 million a year contracts. A lot of these, many of them more than that. Devontae Adams is next, 2nd round pick. Cooper Kupp is next, 3rd round pick. Devontae Smith is next. Okay, number 10 overall. So we got barely in the top 10 there. DK Metcalf is next, 2nd round pick. Deebo Samuel, 2nd round pick. Michael Pittman Jr., 2nd round pick. Terry McLaurin, 3rd round pick. Calvin Ridley, late 1st round pick. Stephon Diggs, 5th round pick. T. Higgins, 2nd round pick. DJ Moore, late 1st round pick. Mike Evans. Okay, Mike Evans is legit. Mike Evans is the first guy who shows up here as a 31-year-old who's played out all these years with the Bucs, 7th overall. Legit. Like, he's, again, we're finally getting up to the age too. Like, a lot of the contracts, well, Cooper Kupp, I forget that Cooper Kupp is 31 years. It's the same age as Mike Evans. That's insane. But we're finally getting up into some of these ages, right? Like, a lot of younger guys here who just aren't going to play out multiple contracts on these teams as much. It's just not going to happen. As we go further and further down, Keenan Allen, 3rd round pick. Amari Cooper, okay, there's another legit top 5 pick. Godwin, 2nd round pick, so on and so forth, right? We've had some hits recently. We have Jamar Chase. We have Jalen Waddle. We have DeVonta Smith, who I mentioned here. But I don't think it's enough to overwhelm the trend. And there's somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, if wide receivers aren't taken in the top 10, then they won't be top 10 picks when they're being re-signed. But a lot of these guys are like 2nd round, 3rd round, later. I mean, let's face it, it's just not the same. The opportunity cost, right? It's obvious. Just looking at those numbers, we have to factor that in. It has to be something that we factor in. Now, does it make Latham a better pick than Neighbors? I don't know. For this particular team, I don't know. But I think the model is right. A naive model that's not looking into all of these different details, I think, is correct. And I don't think you can say BPA, best player available, and wide receiver 2nd contracts. Those 2 points, when you investigate them, don't counter and negate what the model is telling you. I don't think it negates it at all. And then player fit scheme also doesn't negate it at all. There are like team-specific issues that might negate it somewhat, but nothing with those 2. And that's how I would look and investigate these sorts of things. So I'll take the W in my debate against myself. Okay. What other Q&A do we have here so far that I can bring it up before we get on to the next topic? How would you approach the draft if you were the GM of a team like the Packers who had needs at non-premium positions? Would you really pass on linebacker and safety with only 2 linebackers and 1 safety on the roster? Well, number one is you draft in free. You're drafting in free agency. I was trying to come up with like a witty remark here, but that didn't quite work. Anyway, everything, it's all part of a holistic thing. I wrote a piece about this where I said I think I called it inverting the pyramid, stealing that from a soccer book, where I wrote a piece about this where it's saying, okay, we got to think about this in a way where the draft comes last, but it's the most important thing. So we got to think about that when we're doing the other things, when we're doing trades and when we're doing free agent signings. We got to think about the draft. So we're thinking about the draft. So if you're thinking to yourself and you're the Packers, oh, we really need linebackers and safeties right now, then you should be signing those in free agency. Now, maybe the Packers, do the Packers have some cap issues? And that can end. This is another reason where people say, oh, the cap is fake, the cap is this, the cap is that. I mean, if the cap starts to mess with you in making bad decisions, then it can become a problem. Let me see. Effective cap space, they're kind of in the middle. I'm not sure where they were to start free agency. But like if you don't have, like you're going to overpay on these guys in free agency, right? But you kind of want to do that sometimes on the right position. So that's what I would say. I'd say look at off-ball linebackers, look at the safeties in free agency, fill up those spots, give yourself now flexibility to draft other premium positions. Don't feel the pull of need on non-premium positions. You know, if you can't ignore it, the draft comes last. You got to pre-plan for the draft. And I'd also say if you're the Packers and maybe you look at some of the premium positions and you say we're covered there, you're probably not as covered as you think you are on a lot of these positions. There's nothing wrong with doubling up. I know the rookie contract window, blah, blah, blah. Most rookies first year are not super valuable. So you got to be thinking like a year in advance on a lot of these things too. So that's how I would look at it for the Packers. I would say fill those positions in free agency so you don't have to be thinking you're being pushed in a certain way in the draft. Q&A. Okay. I'm not trying to worsen your relationship with Lions fans. It's okay. You know what's funny about fandom on there is they'll say like, oh, I love it that Kevin Cole's getting that Brad Holmes is making these nerds so upset. I don't care. I'm not upset. Like, I don't care. This guy had a sweatshirt printed. I think he's being a little bit more affected by the criticism than I am with his pushback. You know, I got a lot of other teams to criticize. You guys just have one team to care, to live and die by. I got plenty of teams that I can hate on and love. Okay. I have to ask, because I'm on St. Brown at $30 million in overpay for primarily slot receiver. Yeah, I think it is. I mean, I this is something that I talked about on Twitter a little bit. I get it. He's valuable, but I just can't get over. And I think I talked about this in a podcast, potentially. A guy with a 7.3 yard ADOT. He's just more replaceable. There's a reason he went in the fourth round. Not that you can find a replacement in the fourth round, but they are more replaceable. So again, when it comes to opportunity cost, seems like a lot, but there's a lot of shenanigans going on with that contract. So he's not really $30 million a year also. Ronnie Stanley, he agreed to lower his contract because he wasn't staying on the field. Okay, well, that's what happened there. But regardless, we know he's like a fantastic player, right? And he was a top 10 pick. Williams kind of forced his way out. Yeah, I guess you're kind of right about that. So again, that kind of goes to my point that it's just hard to get these dudes. Now, it's hard to get wide receivers, but we've seen a bunch of trades for wide receivers in their prime, right? Okay. Thoughts on the rookie tight end landing spots? Okay, well, this might be beyond what I want to get in here. I have no thoughts on landing spots. Q&A. What do you think? And I mean, I have thoughts, but Jaheim Bell, yeah, well, I want to see Jaheim Bell get signed. I mean, it's fine. Whatever. I can't get into landing spots. Sorry. What do you think of the Steelers denying the Najee fifth-year option? I mean, these fifth-year options, I think what this is telling you a lot when you look at about half of them, I think, are denied or didn't even have a chance to deny them because players have already been cut in some circumstances. These fifth-year options are just not that valuable. Maybe at quarterback. Other than quarterback, having to guarantee it a year in advance. I saw a funny tweet where people were like, oh, this is the last day for the Chiefs to guarantee the fifth-year option on Kadarius Toney. Are you out of your mind? Are you gonna guarantee Kadarius Toney money a year in advance? That's like that's like throwing away money. Kadarius Toney's just gonna be in the lab working on his rap albums if you do that. He's not gonna have anything to prove this season. Okay. Anyway, let's get back to some more stuff before we get. Okay. So one last thing I want to talk about: Penix, Knicks. I know I've gone ad nauseum on this, but one thing I want to mention is the big board. The big board changes and maybe what's not showing up a bit in here. So I did some numbers, and I knew that these numbers were potentially a little bit on the bias side, but I did some numbers comparing big boards and what's going on with quarterbacks this year versus quarterbacks in the past. So I was looking up to see if I had anything to say about Laporta. That's what you're seeing on the screen. Let's go to. Okay, so I looked at some big board sort of stuff. They're teams are valuing quarterbacks more than ever, and one of the reasons, actually, the reason that this came to me is that Steve Ruiz wrote a piece over at The Ringer about how the second round quarterback doesn't exist anymore, and it kind of showed how all these guys are getting pushed into the first round. I think for the most part, like that's a good thing. Now, I think his piece was like they're learning all the wrong lessons. I mean, I don't know, maybe they are, but if we look at big board strictly, for what it's worth. Patrick Mahomes, this is according to Jack Lichtenstein's big board here that we're going off of. So Patrick Mahomes was 33 on the big board, and he went 10th overall. So 23 spots early. Josh Holmes was 31, and he went 7th overall. I'm not talking about mock drafts here. I'm talking about big boards, okay? Because mock drafts are like highly influenced by where you think guys are going to go. So Jalen Hurts was 80 on the consensus big board. He went 53. So all these guys are like in the 25 spot range earlier than what they were. Now for Penix, JJ McCarthy, and Bo Nix, it's in that 17 to 30 sort of range for how much earlier they went. More, but not dramatically different, right? So if you're saying that Penix and Nix are being historically overdrafted, what you're also saying in a way, and I'll get to like the suppositions to this argument here, but you're also saying that like Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, and Patrick Mahomes were being vastly overdrafted. You could say to a certain degree, Justin Herbert going at 6, where I think he was 17 on big boards, was being overdrafted. You're saying that Jordan Love, who went 22nd, 23rd, and was, in the 40s on big boards or 30s or 40s on big boards was overdrafted. I mean, you're basically missing out on most, if not nearly all, of the top young quarterbacks in the NFL if you're not reaching on these guys. Lamar Jackson might be like the only one because he actually had a big board rating, I think that was in the 20s, and then he went 32nd. So almost so like this whole idea, and I posted my nemesis, my personal nemesis, Matt Miller's quote on here where he says, "Look, teams always reach for quarterbacks. Stop it. Stop. Would you stop saying that? Stop saying the teams always reach for quarterbacks. Stop." I mean, you're basically saying teams should never draft Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Jordan Love, Justin Herbert, blah, blah, blah. Like, what does reach mean if it's the correct thing to do? I mean, it all boils back to the fact that these big boards stink. And that's why I have my better big board that I put out with positional value. Like that's all, like they have a really bad process to their big board. They don't weight positional value enough. And then when teams make better picks, then we say they're reaching for them. It's all a cluster F there of what's going on there. But, Miller always gets me every time. So what you're saying here is if there's something uniquely different about what's going on this year, and I think there's like some part uniquely different, some part teams are just getting smarter about drafting these guys earlier. What you have to be saying is that the big boards are changing. And this is what a lot of people, objections that came in were saying, and I acknowledge this here. So I have to say, if we think Penix and Nix are being overdrafted more than previous hits, then big boards are also softer evaluating quarterbacks. I do think that is happening. But at the same point in time, all these guys are like, oh, if Patrick Mahomes was coming out this year, he would have been top 5 on the big board. I don't know about that. I have no idea. Like, we saw this with like the Malik Willises of the world, where he was really, really high on big boards and he didn't go to the 3rd round in the NFL draft and he stinks. So, like, let's not all pretend that the concept of a athletically talented, strong arm quarterback was invented in 2017. Like as if John Elway wasn't the greatest prospect in the history of mankind back in 1984 because of that exact reason. Because he was a that type of quarterback. Obviously, there were other things that were holding Patrick Mahomes down. The system that he was playing in, the fact that he didn't win any games, his weird style. You know, you look at the draft evaluations on Patrick Mahomes. A lot of guys are like, this footwork's not going to happen. This throwing motion's not going to happen. There, shootouts. You can't play in this type of way in the NFL. A lot of that would still be happening. So do I think Mahomes would be 33 on the consensus big board? No, but I still think he would be a reach by consensus big boards at 10. So there's something going on here. And I think the big boarders of the world, they need to just cop to the fact that we were wrong before. Mea culpa. The nerds were right. I like to hear that every now and again. I'm turning to Brad Holmes here. I want apologies. I want apologies now from people for all these things. Once again, we're right. Now, do I think Penix and Nix were great values here? No, definitely not. But I'm less mad about it than other people are. I'm more like, whatever. And I think you also have to look at this. And this is another problem when it comes to these sorts of discussions. Yeah, you're taking Bo Nix at 12 versus taking him in the 40s, right? The surplus value you're losing on a non-quarterback is vastly overstated by what people think. People think, oh, you're getting such a great player at 8 or 12. The reality is, on average, you're getting a player who's going to get you somewhere between 5 and 15 million in surplus value. And that's the difference. You still get some really darn good players, maybe not an offensive tackle, maybe not a pass rusher, but you can still get some pretty darn good players in the early second round. That's very, very valuable players in the early second round. Think about all these wide receivers I went through who are making the mega bucks, who were drafted in the second round. You can get some damn good players there. So if you're taking a quarterback early, which now they don't exist in the second round anymore, and these other players later, again, it's an opportunity cost sort of thing. And the loss of value that you should expect going to the second round rather than drafting the first round is not as much as you'd think. It goes down to the fact that upside still exists in the later rounds. It's just you don't have as high of a median outcome and as high of a floor. But people seem to think you're only getting the super upside, optimal, all-pro outcomes in these early first-round picks, and that's just not the case at non-quarterback. So that's the last thing. Big board people, give me some love here. Okay, I'll take a couple more questions and then I'll get off of here. Have you ever fit a draft card to the consensus big board instead of the draft position to have less noise with reaches? I'd expect there to be even more positional discrepancy. I haven't, but you're right. There would be even more positional discrepancy, primarily because of the fact that quarterback is so far off. Again, it's the exception when quarterbacks are taken later than their consensus big board. And when they're normally like massively bad, like in the case of the 2022 draft class, where all those guys fell massively. And that also kind of goes to my whole thing of like, oh, you're just going to draft off of big boards. You're not going to have scouts anymore. Something was being picked up by all these different NFL scouts that these quarterbacks stink, and they were right. Like something was going on that the amateur tape watchers were not picking up on, right? People people were all over the place. Like, oh, we need Patrick Mahomes is good. Athletic quarterbacks are good. Josh Allen is good. Therefore, we need Malik Willis. That didn't end up working out so well. You got to be able to actually function as a quarterback. So yeah, I think there would be more positional discrepancy because also big boards stink when it comes to tight end, running back, and linebacker and other things. So yeah. All right, I think that's it for me today. What I may do is actually, when I send this on podcast wise, I'm thinking about paywalling part of this as part of something to do to give the subscribers a little bit something extra if they're not tuning in on YouTube. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll continue to find it here as part of the live stream, but it might be paywalled when it comes to podcasting. And if you're paywalled, you won't be hearing this. So I'll put in a note at the beginning of a shorter version of this. Maybe I'll clip off 25 minutes of it that will go free, and then the rest of it will go paywalled. I'm thinking it through. Maybe we'll do that next week. So I'll say it now. That's a good idea. If anyone's still tuning in, that means you're a mega fan with nothing better to do in your life. I may paywall this next week. So if you really, really, really like it and you want to listen to podcast format, hey, throw me a little something. And get your custom RSS feed where you can get all of this sort of stuff. There's a quick Q&A here, so I'll get it. Do you like how the Chargers approach the draft? Yeah, I do like it. Alt in the first, McConkey in the second. 2 more wide receivers in the 7th. I don't even care about wide receivers in the 7th. They're signing DJ Chark. I think that's good. You need a guy who can get down the field. Although McConkey, I guess I racially profiled him as a as a white guy, and he could get down the field. But yeah, no, I like what they're doing there. I don't buy in this tip of the spear nonsense, but I do like what they're doing there. All right. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. I'll be back at you next week. Once, maybe twice. I don't know. I kind of like this podcast, getting back into the podcasting and the live streaming again. But I appreciate everyone that's tuning in and dropping questions in here, the hardcore fans and those listening to the podcast. Have a good weekend, and I'll talk to you next week. Thanks.